Here I am, yet again, coming to you live from my home. Hold on, that light's real bright. Let's see if this would be better. I'm all about the better ambient light. So, remember how I told you guys that there was one kid that wasn't sick? Yeah, well, he's sick. So, in any case, I am here at home once again. It is like 8:30, and I've already had 4 slices of pepperoni pizza this morning. We had a bit of a party last night for Halloween, and I was really looking forward to a normal week this week, and it just does not look like it's going to happen. For my face-to-face classes, luckily, I think I can kind of merge all of the classes into one single YouTube lecture once again, just to kind of give myself a break. I miss you guys. One of my face-to-face classes I haven't seen in a week. Now, this is pretty standard for all the online classes. I mean, you guys get YouTube videos all the time. So, yeah, you guys are used to it. But good news is I'm healthy. So I'm back to full functionality. Now, again, I'm kind of handling all the classes at once with this YouTube video. So for those of you who aren't in the online classes, just hold tight for a minute. Online, I've got to go in for jury duty Wednesday. There's a slight chance they might hit the minimum number of jurors, so I might not have to go in. So that would be great if that doesn't happen. But if it does, I'm going to have to cancel the team sessions. And we didn't have them last week because I couldn't even say my own name last week. I was so sick. So here's what we're going to do. For the online classes, we'll reschedule the team sessions for Thursday, just in case I have to go in for jury duty. And they will be worth a ton of points. So definitely mark that on your calendar, that we'll have team sessions on Thursday instead of Wednesday because they'll be worth a lot. If you can't make it, obviously let me know. And we'll set up some type of appointment system so you guys can get some points that way too, because we got to start getting these participation points in. Some of you guys are really behind. And if you are behind, feel free and go back and do the peer review stuff. You can always go and write in the discussion forums if you've got more stuff to share. So that's one of the ways that you kind of buff up your participation points if you need to. Okay. So on to the material for today. And like I said, luckily this is for everyone. So whether you're doing your community research project or you're doing your current event project, and that's 1101 and 1010, we need to start having a couple of conversations about different types of research sources, where they come from and what we can do with them. Now, a few weeks ago, I gave you guys a kind of preliminary library discussion question in the forum where you guys could go in and ask our librarian for advice in citing sources. I don't think anybody went in and did that. And this is not for the face-to-face courses. I know I'm being terrible today, but I got a sick kid in there. And adulthood is hard. Adulthood is difficult. Like, I wish I'd had some warning when I started having kids that things were just going to get so much. It's not that life is harder. It's more complicated. Things are just, there's so many moving parts, and sometimes it's just so hard to keep track of where one thing is going, where another thing is going, and you just end up feeling overwhelmed all the time. But in any case, oh my God, where was I? Where was I? For the community research project, you guys, maybe I just haven't had enough pizza. You know what? Let's just jump into the material. This is pertinent for everyone. Oh, that's right, the library. I opened a discussion forum where you could go in and ask the librarian questions. He's embedded in the class. We're going to start needing to cite material. So from here on out, if you guys want to go and participate in that discussion forum, ask our librarian how to find sources, how to cite sources, how to put sources in your text. That's bonus points for you, okay? Like, I should have made it required, but this is the first time I've done it, so I wanted to kind of test it out first. But for now, guys can get some more extra bonus points by going in and asking a question in that forum. That's for the 1101. So online 1101, if you're looking for some extra bonus points, go and ask some questions in that embedded discussion forum. Okay. Now on to the actual material. I know I've just been going through a laundry list of housekeeping stuff. Oh man, I didn't do anything last week. Okay. So let's actually just kind of talk about a few research source-oriented stuff. Now, one of the first things I like to talk about when I'm talking about gathering resources, for the most part, I've had you guys kind of sort of out in the wild, right? Mainly getting like media sources, things like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. Those sources are good, but in a lot of ways, we can't trust them as much as we could other sources. But before I start talking about that, let's dial it back even further. There are two types of sources that we use when we gather information. The first is primary. Primary sources. When I ask students to define a primary source, I get a lot of weird, kooky answers. And that's obviously completely understandable. If you don't know something, you're going to try to guess. And those guesses are going to be wonky and all over the place. For a lot of students, they think a primary source is like your main source, or it's the one that's the most important. That's not what that is. A primary source is something that's coming from firsthand experience, right? You have what I call skin in the game. An example of this, and I do this all the time. I got two main examples of this I like to talk about. Let's talk about gun control. Now, I'm going to try to both sides of this because I'm really not looking for a big political discussion today. My brain's not ready for that. But gun control. Let's say we're talking about gun control, and we're talking about legislation. We're talking about all this stuff. What would a primary source for gun control be? Well, there's actually a lot. If you're talking about gun control, a good primary source would potentially be a gun owner. If you own a gun, you have a lot of firsthand experience or firsthand kind of involvement in the topic itself. If you're a gun owner, the likelihood of you wanting to have really, really restrictive gun control laws is kind of low, right? Because you already own one. If you already own one, why would you want to restrict your own right to own property that you already own, right? It's not completely outside of the realm of possibility. I have a couple of very liberal friends who own guns, and they think we need stronger gun control laws to prevent certain types of firearms to be purchased. So it's not impossible. But from my experience, a gun owner is probably not going to advocate for the restriction of their rights, right? And that's understandable. You'll notice I'm talking about this in a way that's not condemning gun owners or necessarily supporting them. I'm just kind of, reflecting on the fact that they have probably a particular bias. I don't even want to think of it as bias because bias has such a negative connotation. People have an agenda or a preference, an opinion, a stance. It's really hard not to if you're a primary source, if you're involved in what it is you're talking about. Some other examples in the gun control debate. A gun rights activist or a gun control activist, victims of gun crime. Again, there's nothing wrong with these people's opinions and their stances. The point is they kind of have one, right? They have skin in the game. They have personal involvement. That's typically a primary source, right? So let's think about some other big topics. 9/11. Okay, 9/11 is kind of a giant one that has a lot of really weird exceptions. In a lot of ways, anybody alive when 9/11 occurred, anybody who watched it on TV had an emotional reaction to it. Being a primary source for 9/11 is very wide, but the most pure example of this would be people who were in downtown New York, people who are at the Pentagon, people who had family who were involved or were there or were victims. All of these are primary sources, right? That's the basic. That's the gist of a primary source, firsthand experience. Now, secondary sources are. it's not that you don't have firsthand experience, but you're trying not to. And, keeping in mind the kind of human element of this, it's really hard not to have a stance in the thing that you're talking about. But secondary sources are really trying to not have an opinion and not have any involvement, which again is difficult, but that's what they're trying to do. Examples of secondary sources. The media tries to be, right? The media is trying to sift through primary sources to remove or at least kind of diversify the perspective and bring you something that is not so rooted in that agenda or that personal stake. So when you look at something in the media, typically what they do is they take firsthand accounts from a whole bunch of people. They get a bunch of different perspectives. They kind of blend it together. That's what we usually expect from the media. And there's also an expectation that when you're watching the news, it's supposed to just be news, right? It's supposed to be, this is what happened. They're not supposed to have like an interpretation of it. Now, one of the reasons that I talk about the news media when I do this project, and I refer to it as the wild, the news media in this country has become a bit of a different beast. And it's not like that this was ever not the case, but it seems to have become magnified in the past couple of decades. As I've been alive, it seems to have gotten notably worse. And here's why. We have a lot of distrust of the media these days. And, I'm going to get political here for a minute for my political current event students, and I'll try to flip this over to the community writing side in a minute, so just kind of bear with me. But what is a news channel's primary goal when it brings you information? What does it want to do? Does it want to inform you, or does it want to make money off of you? Ultimately, it's trying to make money off of you. And how does it do that? It typically looks for stories that people are going to want to consume, right? They're looking for stuff that people will click on or people will watch. CNN and Fox News both kind of have like a weird problem. Their revenue, their money stream, and ultimately everything in a capitalistic society comes down to the money, right? And that's not a bad thing, but we do need to be aware of it. Ultimately, their goal is to make money, right? So their biggest incentive is to get eyeballs and to get viewers so that they can sell the ad space and they can get more money for that ad space. So they don't have a lot of incentive to bring you something that is like the cold, hard truth, because people don't necessarily watch or consume news that's just cold, objective truth. They want a spin to it. And Fox News really did a good job of this. And this is not a slam against Fox News, but Fox News builds most of their programming and really kind of builds the station's personality around these kind of opinion guys. And the opinion guys, you watch Hannity, you watch Tucker Carlson, you watch Greta Van Susteren. Is she still on there? It's been a long time since I watched Fox News. You're getting a very kind of like stance-oriented reporting. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but ultimately you have to be mindful of what their goal is. They're making money off of you. CNN has their own brand of this. And in fact, if you were to corner me, sorry, I got a text and I want to make sure that I don't have any more sick kids. If you watch CNN kind of weirdly tries to hide their bias a little bit more. They try to kind of sort of blend it to make it look a little bit more objective. In a lot of ways, kind of a weird thing for me. It's kind of annoying when they do that because Fox News, you know what you're getting, right? It's very in your face, whereas CNN's like, we're trying to play it down the middle. And it's like, no, you're not. This isn't me insulting. This is me just kind of evaluating what these news organizations do. This is what they all do. They're trying to make money off of you, right? So in order to get something truly secondary that doesn't have so much of that stance and that involvement, you have to work a little harder these days. It doesn't necessarily mean that we discount everything from the media, but it's important to keep in mind what their goal is, right? There is a sensationalism that fuels that. So sometimes the more controversial elements of the story get emphasized, and the actual goings on behind the scenes are a little bit more buried for the purpose of bringing more people to the information, right? So here's what I want you guys to kind of think about. And this is kind of like, this will go in well with this week's information report. Remember, everybody's writing information reports right now. 1101's writing information reports and 1010. So if you are doing the political current event project, you're doing this. If you're doing the community writing project, you're doing this. Now, I can kind of split this in half a little bit, interestingly. If you are in 1101 and you're writing about the current event, you're going to almost solely rely on what would traditionally be secondary sources. So you're going to be getting news, right? And you need to start trying to find a way to filter and find news that's useful for you, that's bringing you information that you can actually put to some action in your writing. So one of the first things I want you guys to think about in 1101, is there any way you could put some primary in there? It's not necessary, but it's something to think about. And in what way are your sources reliable as a secondary source? And what way might they not be? Are you seeing opinion come out, right? Are you seeing a stance or a bias come out? As you write your information report and you start reporting on what's going on around you, keep that in mind, because that's interesting to kind of look at as we're gathering information, like put a note in there. For my community writing people, you might end up relying more on primary sources, right? Maybe you have an acquaintance. Maybe you have a relative who knows a lot about this community who can tell you things. That's perfectly fine. In fact, one of the things that we could do, I'll teach you, or the librarian might even help you cite that. Perspective of someone from the community for this project could be extremely valuable. Academia typically, and academia is the college, right? It's the schools. Academia tends to value only the secondary sources, only the stuff that is like commodified and sanitized, that's trustworthy. But for this project, we definitely can bring in primary stuff, and I would like for you to try to. So think about who could be a primary source as you're looking around the community and trying to find stuff to discuss. There's all sorts of ways that you could bring people that you know into this equation. The challenge for you guys is probably going to be doing the secondary. There's just not as many secondary sources in this area as there are primary ones. So you might have to end up looking at the Brunswick News. You might have to look at organizations that release information and articles and stuff like that. I had this conversation, I think, on this channel the other day where we were talking about like community organizations that might release information. Things like churches may have some news about what's going on in the community, community centers. Those types of places are going to probably need to be the fountain of your secondary sources, because you are going to need secondary sources. So if you don't have any for the first information report, which again is due this Thursday, but also remember, I'm not going to grade this one harshly. This is a little bit more notes oriented, and it needs to be submitted into the discussion forum, not a Dropbox. These information reports are really more discussion than they are a formal submission. We're leading up to the research paper now. So these things can be a little chaotic. They can be a little bit more notes oriented. So it's not like you necessarily have to go in and just be perfect with this. It might take a while for our topics to kind of form and become more solid as we move forward. So start thinking about all that. This has just been kind of a primer to some of the more nuanced bits of research. Next time, we'll talk about scholarly sources in the classroom and in the YouTube video if necessary. I'm really, no disrespect to the criminal justice and to the criminal justice system and the system of democracy itself. I'm certainly not going to complain if I get called as a juror. I won't. That's my duty. duty. But it would be nice to just, not have my life get turned upside down. But I'm not going to complain, because it's one thing to have your life turned upside down. It's one thing to, be involved in a case that's as, crazy as this one is. In any case, listen, guys, I know that it's been really difficult for me to keep up. I'm still behind on grading with both the how-to articles and the self-evals. I'm loving what I see so far on that. I'm not grading those harshly. You guys probably could stand to use some good points in the grade book. So that one, I've graded some of the earlier assignments pretty harshly. This one's a little bit of a gimme. I'm not being too much of a jerk on this one. So I'm catching up, and hopefully once I get my kids seen about today, I can be a little bit more active and involved. I am sorry, doing the best I can, and I love y'all, and I miss y'all, and just start taking all this into consideration as you're writing these information reports. The only thing I want you working on in both 1101 and 1010 is working on this info report, telling me what you see around you, what you might like to do more research on. That's the only thing you have to be worried about right now. We'll start introducing more nuance to it as I get back into the classroom and as my life finally starts to return to normalcy. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you.